"Why are you afraid of a 10-year-old girl's letter?" Margaret Hale asked. Raymond Ellis stood beside his darkened monitor with a cardboard box pressed against his navy shirt, his security badge resting beside a chipped World's Best Dad mug. Chloe held a cream-colored envelope against the box with both hands. "Please read my letter" was written across it in blue marker. Behind the glass wall, George Hamilton reached for the conference room door. "This is not evidence," he said. Chloe looked at Margaret. "It tells where my dad was." 3 hours earlier, the only unusual sound on the engineering floor had been the repeated click of Raymond's mouse against a screen that refused to accept his password. The overhead lights gave off their familiar electrical hum. Burned coffee sat in the pot near the break room, and late afternoon sunlight cut pale rectangles across the gray carpet. Raymond tried his credentials once more, watched the access denied message appear, then quietly moved his hand away from the keyboard. Eric Dawson stopped beside his desk, wearing the careful expression he used whenever bad news belonged to someone else. "Raymond, can we talk privately?" His voice was soft enough to sound considerate, but 2 security officers were already waiting near the elevators. Raymond glanced toward the visitor chairs. Chloe sat there with her purple school backpack between her sneakers, finishing homework while she waited for him to take her home. He lowered his voice. "Not in front of my daughter." Eric gave a sympathetic nod, as though the request had been his idea. "Of course, we want to handle this with dignity." Inside the small conference room, Rebecca Stone slid a termination document across the table without meeting Raymond's eyes. George appeared on the wall monitor from the boardroom upstairs. He spoke about accountability, business continuity, and protecting thousands of jobs. No one raised a voice. That made the words land harder. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Rebecca asked whether he wished to make a statement, he looked through the glass at Chloe, then back at the unsigned paper. "Will my team be affected?" Rebecca folded her hands. "This meeting concerns only you." "Then put that in writing." George's jaw tightened for less than a second. Eric stepped in with a gentle smile. "Raymond, leaving quietly will make this easier for everyone, especially Chloe." Raymond's eyes settled on him. "Do not use my child to make your decisions sound kind." The room went still. He did not beg. He did not accuse anyone. He returned to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and placed a framed photograph of Chloe's 3rd-grade science fair into the box. He wrapped the chipped mug inside his jacket so it would not break. When one of the guards reached for a stack of handwritten notes, Raymond covered them with his palm. "Those are continuity instructions for the overnight team. Priya needs them before I leave." Even then, with his name already being erased from the company, he was thinking about the people who would still be there when the screens turned red. At 5:47, he set his badge on top of the box. Chloe stood and walked to him. Her face was composed, but her fingers had crushed one corner of the envelope. "Dad, I wrote something." Raymond saw the words on the front and crouched until they were eye level. "You don't have to ask them for anything." "I'm not." She looked past him toward the glass boardroom. "I just want them to read it." George instructed his assistant to close the door. Margaret, seated at the head of the table, stopped it with one hand. She took the envelope but did not open it immediately. "A letter is not proof," George said.
"No", Margaret replied.
"It is a reason to preserve the evidence." She ordered legal counsel to freeze the relevant records before anyone could delete, revise, or release them. Raymond's breath caught, not from hope, but from the realization that Chloe had been watching more closely than he knew. Margaret opened the envelope and read the first line aloud. "My dad says the truth leaves footprints." George did not look at the letter. Before Raymond's name had even been read, he looked directly at Rebecca. George looked directly at Rebecca, and for one brief second, the polished calm on her face slipped. Then her fingers straightened the edge of the termination file, and the professional mask returned. "We should continue through the proper process." "The process is paused," Margaret said. "Only the data release is paused," George corrected. The air conditioning hummed above them, too cold for the late summer evening, while Chloe's cream-colored envelope rested open beneath Margaret's hand. Through the glass, Raymond stood beside his cardboard box, one palm resting lightly on Chloe's shoulder as if he were the one comforting her. A soft chime sounded across the engineering floor. Phones lit up. Laptops displayed the same company-wide message. Raymond Ellis was leaving the organization following concerns involving performance, accountability, and operational judgment. 2 lines below, Eric Dawson was thanked for his leadership during a critical service incident. No one said anything at first. Priya stared at the email with one hand over her mouth. David removed his glasses, cleaned lenses that were already clean, and kept his eyes lowered. Near the elevators, 2 younger engineers whispered until Raymond turned in their direction. They stopped immediately. Eric approached with slow, measured steps, his tie still straight, his expression arranged into something that could pass for sympathy. "I did not approve the timing of that email. But you approved the words," Raymond said. "The language came from human resources." Eric lowered his voice. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." The fluorescent light caught the silver edge of Raymond's security badge where it rested on top of the box. Beside it, the chipped World's Best Dad mug was wrapped halfway inside his navy jacket, its handle still visible like something trying not to disappear. Raymond looked at the message on Priya's screen, then at Eric. "Take her name out of the incident report." Eric blinked. "This is not the time. Take David's out too." "Raymond, they were part of the deployment team." Raymond's voice remained level. "The rollback decision was mine." Priya took a step forward. "That is not what happened." Rebecca appeared at the doorway before she could say more. Her heels made small, even clicks against the tile. "Priya, this is an individual employment matter. Please return to your workstation." "But the report, please." The word was gentle, almost maternal, and left no room for another sentence. Priya's jaw tightened. Raymond gave her the smallest shake of his head. He would not let her lose her job trying to save his. Rebecca guided him back into the small conference room and rotated her laptop so the evaluation faced him. Red boxes filled the screen. Failure to collaborate, delayed response, resistance to management direction, actions contributing to system instability. Raymond leaned closer. The reflection of the document moved across his glasses. Near the bottom, one paragraph described the need for a single accountability line during high-risk incidents. He had heard those exact words once before, spoken by George during a quarterly operations meeting. "May I have a copy?" Raymond asked. "The record is confidential." "It is my record. It remains under legal review." He looked at her. "You said it was finalized." Rebecca's fingers paused over the trackpad. Only for a second. "Finalized for employment purposes. Reviewable for legal purposes." Behind the glass wall, Margaret watched without interrupting. She did not look convinced of Raymond's innocence, but she had stopped looking at the evaluation and started watching the people explaining it. Raymond scrolled upward. One entry stated that he had failed to warn leadership about a serious architectural risk before the payroll incident. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but recognition. 19 days before the failure, he had opened an urgent service ticket. He remembered the number because Chloe had been practicing multiplication facts beside him when he typed it.
SR 4821.
Rebecca reached over and closed the document. "Your access to internal records has ended. That ticket existed. This is not the forum to debate technical history." "Then what is this forum for?" The question landed quietly. Rebecca drew a breath but did not answer. Outside, Raymond returned to his desk and removed a folded sheet from beneath his keyboard. It was a hand-drawn continuity map for Priya, marked with 3 times in dark blue ink, 11:48 p.m., 2:13 a.m., and 4:06 a.m. He set it beside her notebook. "If the payroll queue turns red tonight, follow the arrows, not the dashboard summary." "Raymond, I can tell them what you did. Tell them only what you can prove." Eric came around the partition just as Raymond lifted the box. His gaze dropped to the 3 handwritten times. The color drained slightly from his face. Without asking, he placed his palm over the paper and turned it face down. From inside the boardroom, Margaret saw the movement, and looked back at Chloe's letter as though the small dates written by a child had just become something else entirely. Margaret's eyes moved from Eric's hand covering the 3 times to the open letter beneath her palm. "What happened at 2:13? She asked. "A routine recovery step," George answered from behind the glass. "Then why hide the paper?" Eric slowly lifted his hand. The blue numbers remained on the page, pressed deep enough into the fibers that Chloe could see them from beside her father's box. Raymond said nothing. He only folded the continuity map once, placed it in Priya's hands, and told her, "Keep it flat. You may need the arrows later." 6 nights earlier, those same arrows had been drawn at Raymond's kitchen table while Chloe worked through multiplication problems beside him. A carton of milk stood between them. Her pencil eraser left pink crumbs across a worksheet, and the small clock above the stove clicked louder than usual in the quiet apartment. Raymond's phone vibrated against the table. The screen showed a yellow payroll warning, then another, then red. Chloe looked up. "Do you have to go back?" Raymond studied the alert, then glanced at the envelope from her school resting near his elbow. Inside was a notice about the science club fee due Friday. He had already moved money from groceries to cover part of it. The rent reminder on his phone was still unread. "I have to check something," he said. "Will you miss dinner?" He looked at the 2 plates he had just warmed. "Not if you eat yours." He slid the fuller plate toward Chloe and wrapped the smaller one in foil. She accepted the trade without noticing it was a trade. Before leaving, Raymond checked the deadbolt twice, called David to stay on the phone with Chloe until the neighbor arrived, and tucked his late wife's old kitchen timer beside her homework. "When it rings, brush your teeth." Chloe frowned. "You always say that. And you always negotiate. 5 more minutes? 3. She smiled because 3 meant he was worried but trying not to show it. At the office, the engineering floor smelled of overheated plastic and stale coffee. Priya stood beside a bank of monitors, her face washed pale by the warning lights. "The synchronization queue is duplicating entries," she said. "Eric told us to push the update. Did you test the fallback?" "Not fully." "Did he know that?" Priya's silence answered for her. Raymond set his untouched foil-wrapped dinner beside the keyboard and opened the incident console. The payroll platform served small businesses across 3 states, diners, repair shops, home care agencies, places where a delayed check could mean a late rent payment or an empty refrigerator. He found the first fracture in the authentication layer and heard the alert pattern repeat through the speakers. 2 short tones, a pause, then 1 long tone. Not random, a loop. 19 days earlier, he had warned that disabling the protective layer called Harbor could allow exactly this kind of failure to spread. He opened service ticket SR 4821. The ticket still existed, but the status had been changed from critical to accepted risk. "Who changed that?" Priya whispered. Raymond did not answer. He clicked into the audit panel, but the approving account was masked behind executive permissions. Another alarm sounded. "Should I call Eric?" "Call him. And tell him what?" "Tell him the truth." Eric answered on the 4th ring. His voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "Can this wait until morning?" "Payroll cannot," Raymond said. "Harbor was disabled. We needed deployment speed. The queue is spreading. Then roll it back. That could expose Priya as the deployment owner." Eric exhaled. "Someone has to own the decision." Raymond looked at Priya's trembling hands. "Ido." He entered his own name as decision owner, then asked David to verify the older servers while he isolated the damaged queue. He did not remove Priya from the technical record. He removed her from the blame narrative Eric was already building. At 2:13 a.m., Raymond initiated the rollback. At 4:06, the red panels began turning amber, then green. The foil around his dinner had gone cold and soft with condensation. Chloe called from home. "Did you eat?" Raymond looked at the untouched food. "I'm fine, baby." "That's not what I asked." For a moment he closed his eyes. His wife used to say the same thing. "Go back to sleep," he whispered. Before leaving, Raymond recorded a short summary on the incident bridge, naming the failed process, the risk created by disabling Harbor, and the steps needed to keep the next payroll cycle safe. Then he wrote the continuity arrows for Priya and placed the paper beneath his keyboard. He asked for no credit. He sent no message to the board. By sunrise, Eric's name appeared on the leadership summary, while Raymond's remained only beside the rollback decision. Back in the present, Margaret looked again at the 3 times and then at Chloe's letter. The dates matched the nights the child said her father came home carrying the same unopened blue lunch bag. Margaret turned to the independent counsel. Preserve ticket SR 4821 and the incident bridge recording. Rebecca's hand tightened around the termination file. The kindness Raymond had used to shield Priya had left his name on the one decision everyone wanted to blame, and that same decision might now become the first proof that he had saved them. The kindness that had protected Priya now made Raymond look more guilty. His name stood alone beside the 2:13 a.m. rollback, while Eric's name remained attached to the leadership summary that claimed the recovery as his own. Rebecca closed the termination file and spoke with the careful calm of someone explaining a rule no one was allowed to question. He accepted responsibility in writing. For the decision, Raymond said, not for causing the failure. That distinction may not matter legally. The independent audit team arrived 20 minutes later carrying sealed evidence bags, silver laptops, and a portable drive with a red tamper strip across its case. The engineering floor had grown quiet enough for everyone to hear the soft clicks of cameras changing direction above the ceiling tiles. Through the glass wall, Margaret watched 2 auditors photograph Raymond's dark monitor, his badge on the cardboard box, and the folded continuity map marked 11:48 p.m., 2:13 a.m., and 4:06 a.m. She had not decided he was innocent. The surface evidence still pointed toward him. His credentials, his rollback, his signature accepting the final decision. George stood beside her with both hands resting on the conference table. This is what happens when an employee bypasses management and improvises under pressure. The system recovered, Margaret said, after he destabilized it. Do we know that? The incident report says so. Margaret looked at Rebecca. Which version? No one answered immediately. On the engineering floor, an auditor opened the badge access records. Raymond entered the building at 11:48 p.m. His VPN session began at 12:07. At 2:13, his account accessed the rollback console. At 4:06, the payroll queue returned to normal operating range. The sequence matched Chloe's dates, but it did not prove what Raymond had done inside those hours. Eric folded his arms. Many engineers work late during a launch. Presence is not authorship. That is correct, Raymond said. Eric seemed surprised by the agreement. Raymond stepped closer to the screen but kept his hands behind his back. Are the clocks synchronized? One auditor looked up. Across which systems? Badge access, VPN, server telemetry, and parking cameras. They should be. Should be is not the same as are. The room slowed. The auditor checked the time sources and found the parking system running 3 minutes behind the server clock. It was a small discrepancy, not enough to clear Raymond, but enough to show why conclusions could not be built from a single record. Margaret noticed that Raymond had just weakened evidence that appeared to support him because accuracy mattered more to him than advantage. Chloe stood beside the box, tracing the chipped handle of the mug through the fabric of his jacket. Dad came home when the sky was getting light, she said quietly. Was it every night? Margaret asked. Chloe shook her head. Only the nights his blue lunch bag was still full. It was the memory of a child, simple and limited. But the dates in her letter matched the camera footage of Raymond leaving with the unopened bag hanging from his shoulder. George stepped toward the screen. None of this changes the fact that the 213 rollback bypassed my deployment order. The sentence landed before anyone moved. Margaret turned her head slowly. How did you know what happened at 213? George's expression did not change. I know my company. The auditors have not described the command yet. It was in the incident materials. The board packet does not mention a deployment order. George shifted his weight, placing himself between Margaret and the monitor for half a second before stepping aside. Then I must have seen it in an earlier draft. Rebecca reached for the termination file as though to organize it, but Margaret placed 2 fingers on the folder and kept it where it was. No documents leave this room. The audit team expanded the preservation order to include executive email, ticket permissions, and administrative service accounts. Raymond watched them open the access history for SR 4821. The ticket had been downgraded 14 minutes after George received the warning, but the approving username was hidden behind a shared executive account. Eric seized on the ambiguity. There. Shared credentials. Anyone with authorization could have changed it. Including me? Raymond asked. Including several people. Then show who logged into the service account before I did. The auditor pulled the authentication chain onto the main screen. Raymond's access appeared at 2:13, exactly where everyone expected it. But 11 minutes earlier, at 2:02 a.m., the same account had been opened from an executive floor workstation that Raymond's badge had never accessed. Margaret looked from the glowing timestamp to George, while Raymond recognized that the unknown login occurred just before Harbor was disabled, and whoever had used it had entered the system before he arrived to save it. The 2:02 a.m. login remained, frozen on the main screen while the room absorbed what it meant. Raymond had not entered the executive floor that night. His badge history proved it. Yet someone using an executive workstation had opened the shared service account 11 minutes before his rollback began. A shared account proves nothing, George said. Then preserve the workstation, Margaret replied. That could interrupt executive operations. Preserve it anyway. The wheels of an auditor's chair stopped scraping across the carpet. For a moment, only the air conditioning could be heard moving through the vents above the glass room. Margaret did not accuse George, but she sent a message to her assistant and ordered the original authentication image copied before anyone on the executive floor could access the machine. Eric stepped closer to the conference table, still wearing the concerned expression of a manager trying to protect everyone from confusion. We should avoid turning a technical ambiguity into a public accusation. Raymond looked at the screen. Then test the technical claim. An hour later, the independent auditors built a sealed replica of the payroll environment. No customer information entered the room. Every action was recorded, and Priya sat at the keyboard because Raymond had insisted no one should later claim he manipulated the result. Chloe waited in a chair near the wall with Raymond's chipped mug in her lap, both hands wrapped around it beneath his navy jacket. The room smelled faintly of warm electronics and the bitter coffee David had brought from downstairs. On the display, the simulated synchronization cue began to pulse yellow. Mr. Dawson, Margaret said, you were credited with leading the recovery. Tell Priya what to do. Eric adjusted his cuffs. Restart the authentication cluster, clear the duplicate queue, then bring the payroll services back online. Priya followed the sequence exactly. The first warning turned red. Then a second service failed. A low alarm began repeating through the speakers, 2 short tones followed by 1 long one. Eric leaned toward the screen. The simulation may not reflect production conditions. It reflects the configuration in your report, the lead auditor said. Run it again, George suggested. Raymond continued listening to the alarm. He did not smile. He did not look at Eric. Pause the second cue, he said. Leave the first one breathing. Priya glanced at the auditor. He nodded. She isolated the second cue but kept the first process active. The red warning stopped spreading. Raymond pointed to a 3-second delay between the tones. Now restore Harbor before clearing authentication. Priya entered the command. The system isolated the corrupted process, preserved the valid payroll entries, and returned to amber. No one spoke. A pen Margaret had been holding came slowly down onto the closed termination file. Eric stared at the stable display as if waiting for it to contradict Raymond. Chloe's shoulders loosened. She did not understand the code, but she understood that the adults had stopped looking at her father like he had broken something. How did you know? Margaret asked. The alert rhythm, Raymond said. The second cue was waiting on the first. If you kill both, the error spreads before the records are separated. Eric recovered his voice. That procedure was developed by the team. Which part did you develop? Raymond asked. The question was quiet enough that Eric could have ignored it, but everyone was looking at him. Harbor Gate was part of a collaborative architecture. Priya's hands stopped above the keyboard. Raymond turned his head slightly. What did you call it? Eric blinked.
Harbor Gate.
That name is not in the board deck, Priya said. It isn't in the operations manual either. The auditors opened the version control history. Lines of code filled the screen, each marked by author, timestamp, and revision note. Raymond's name appeared beside the first harbor protection layer, the recovery logic, and the warning sequence. Eric's name appeared only on the final documentation commit used to prepare the executive presentation. George stepped forward. Code ownership in a corporation is rarely individual. That is true, Raymond said. And this does not prove who changed the ticket. He could have used the moment to humiliate Eric. Instead, he turned to Priya. Explain the isolation step to them. You ran it. They should hear it from you. Priya swallowed, then stood straighter and described the process in plain language. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Priya finished, Margaret ordered the original repository, Raymond's technical notes, and every executive copy of the harbor documentation placed under legal hold. Eric gave a small, strained laugh. There is no need to make this larger than it is. The material reached me through the normal executive channel. The room quieted again. Margaret's eyes moved from Eric to George. Which executive channel? Eric opened his mouth, then stopped. On the audit screen, the original design note appeared beside George's board presentation. The diagrams were identical, so was a rare misspelling in the lower right corner. Only one thing had been removed from the executive version. Raymond Ellis's name. Raymond's name had been removed from the executive presentation, but the misspelled word remained exactly where he had typed it months earlier. The auditors enlarged the lower right corner until the letters filled the wall display. Rebecca stopped tapping her pen. George slipped his phone face down beneath one hand. A copied diagram is not proof of misconduct, he said.
No, Margaret replied.
But it tells us where to look next. The lead auditor opened the metadata from both files. Raymond's warning document had been created 19 days before the payroll incident. George's presentation had been assembled 4 days later from the same diagrams, the same performance figures, and the same unusual spelling. The author field had been replaced with executive operations team. Corporate documents are revised all the time, Rebecca said. Who authorized the revision? Margaret asked. I would have to review the workflow. You just called it routine. The printer near the glass wall finished one final page and fell silent. On the table, the two documents lay side by side beneath the white conference lights, one carrying Raymond's name and one carrying none. The auditors then recovered 3 versions of Raymond's performance evaluation. In the earliest copy, his technical judgment was rated exceptional. In the next, the language had softened. In the final version, created after a private meeting between George and Rebecca, the same judgment had become reckless resistance to leadership. The change history showed Rebecca's credentials. Those edits reflect information received after the incident, she said. Raymond looked at the timestamps. The final version was saved before the incident report was completed. Rebecca's eyes lifted toward him, then immediately toward George. Margaret noticed. She did not speak for several seconds. Instead, she asked the auditors to search for the phrase single accountability line across executive email. A message appeared less than a minute later. It had been sent by George 2 hours after the recovery and before Raymond's evaluation was changed. We need one clean accountability line before the board sees the exposure. George leaned back. That refers to clear communication. Then why was it sent to human resources? Margaret asked. Because employment decisions were becoming part of the response. Before the investigation was finished, his jaw tightened. We were protecting the company. Raymond's continuity paper remained near Priya's hands, its 3 blue times visible through the fold. He could have pointed at George. He could have demanded that the company-wide email be corrected immediately. Instead, he asked the auditor to search older incidents for the same phrase and the same pattern of post-event evaluation changes. The results came slowly, then all at once. For former engineers had been dismissed after major service failures during the previous 3 years. In each case, an operational warning had been downgraded, one employee had been assigned sole responsibility, and a performance document had been revised after an executive meeting. One of the names belonged to a woman David remembered packing her desk while recovering from surgery. Another belonged to a systems analyst who had never found comparable work after the company marked him ineligible for rehire. Priya stared at the list. They did this before Raymond. George stood. This review is exceeding its authorized scope. Sit down, Margaret said. Her voice was not loud, but the command stopped him beside his chair. The glass reflected his face back at him, pale under the conference lights. Margaret turned to Raymond. If these records hold, what do you want us to do first? He looked at Chloe, then at the rows of desks beyond the glass. Protect the payroll cycle. The lead auditor brought up the deployment schedule. A nationwide update containing the configuration that Weekend Harbor was set to enter the next processing window in less than 36 hours. If it failed under full load, paychecks for employees at small businesses across 3 states could be delayed. Margaret asked whether Raymond would help stop it. Priya leads the technical room, he said. David gets written protection. No deployment resumes until the auditors sign off. And your position? People are waiting on Friday checks. My position can wait. The quiet that followed was different from pity. Margaret was no longer studying whether Raymond sounded believable. She was studying the conditions he chose when he finally had leverage. She froze executive bonuses, suspended the deployment, and transferred temporary technical authority to Priya and the audit team. Rebecca reached for her phone. I should coordinate the legal response. Leave it on the table, Margaret said. The auditors restored a deleted incident bridge file. Static filled the speakers, followed by Raymond's tired voice describing the harbor risk. Then another voice interrupted him. Keep that warning out of the board packet until launch is through. George's hand moved toward the playback controls before stopping halfway. Everyone in the room had recognized him. Margaret looked through the open glass door at the employees gathered in silence outside. This will not be handled privately, she said. Tomorrow morning, the board hears the recording with the witnesses present. By 8 the next morning, the glass boardroom had been rearranged like a hearing room. The long table faced a wall-sized screen. Every microphone carried a red recording light, and the door that George Hamilton had tried to close the night before stood fully open. Beyond it, engineers gathered in ordered rows beside the empty desk where Raymond's cardboard box still rested. Raymond entered holding Chloe's hand, his navy shirt wrinkled from a sleepless night, his security badge still lying on top of the box beside the chipped World's Best Dad mug. He did not take the chair offered at the head of the table. He sat beside Priya and kept Chloe behind Margaret's assistant, away from the cameras and the center of the confrontation. George arrived last, carrying a leather folder and the composed expression of a man prepared to explain everyone else's misunderstanding. This proceeding risks damaging the company more than the incident ever did, he began. The board deserves context, not fragments assembled under pressure. Margaret folded her hands. Then provide context after the evidence is entered. The first item was Chloe's cream-colored envelope. Margaret did not read the whole letter. She displayed only the 6 dates Chloe had written and the sentence that had triggered the preservation order. George called it sincere but irrelevant. A child can remember her father coming home late without knowing what he did at work. That is true, Raymond said. He did not look toward the employees outside. Her letter should not be used as technical proof. George's shoulders eased, as if Raymond had just weakened his own case. Then the auditors displayed the second item: badge records, parking footage, VPN activity, and server telemetry. 6 dates, 6 late-night entries, 6 recoveries matching the nights Chloe remembered the unopened blue lunch bag. George leaned forward. Again, presence does not establish competence. Mr. Ellis may have been attempting to repair damage caused by his own unauthorized intervention. A few people outside the glass shifted. For a moment, the explanation seemed to give him solid ground again. Rebecca added that Raymond had signed his name as decision owner at 2:13 a.m., and Eric confirmed he had advised the team to follow standard procedure. The room began to tilt back toward the official story. Margaret did not interrupt. She wanted to see how far each person would carry it. Raymond looked at the timeline. "What time did the failure begin?" he asked. 1:51 a.m., the lead auditor answered. "And what time did I enter the rollback console?" 2:13. "Then my decision cannot have caused an event that started 22 minutes earlier." A chair stopped moving outside the room. George's fingers tightened around the edge of his folder. The instability developed over time. Earlier actions may have contributed. "Which earlier action?" Raymond asked. George glanced toward Eric. Eric opened his mouth, then closed it. Margaret placed the third item on the screen. Ticket SR 4821, created 19 days before the incident, warning that disabling Harbor could allow a synchronization failure to spread through payroll. Its status had been changed from critical to accepted risk 14 minutes after George received the alert. George maintained his calm. "Executives accept operational risk every day. That is not misconduct." "Who changed it?" Margaret asked. "The account was shared." "That was not my question." George looked toward the audience beyond the glass, as though their presence itself were unfair. "This is becoming a public trial of leadership judgment." "No," Raymond said. His voice was low, but every microphone caught it. "It is a record of what happened to the people who had no room to question that judgment." Priya entered the version control history. Raymond's name appeared across the Harbor architecture. Eric's appeared only on the documentation commit used for the executive presentation. Eric insisted the design belonged to the team, and George said internal attribution had no bearing on the incident. Then Rosa Martinez stepped forward with the meeting calendar and auto-transcript from the private session between George and Rebecca. Rebecca objected that automated transcription could mishear words. Rosa calmly identified the room, the attendees, and the moment George had said, "Make the file support the decision." George called the phrase administrative shorthand. For a second time, he seemed to recover. Then Margaret ordered the deleted incident bridge recording played. Static filled the speakers. Raymond's tired voice described the Harbor risk and asked that the warning be placed in the board packet. George's recorded voice answered, "Keep that warning out until launch is through." Chloe's fingers tightened around Raymond's hand. She did not speak or step forward. She only looked at him when the voice from the speakers matched the man seated across the table. George straightened. "The recording captures an incomplete discussion. Raymond's midnight rollback still created the instability we were trying to contain." Raymond turned toward him. "You said I was not part of the recovery." George did not answer. "Now you remember my rollback well enough to blame it." The warning lights on the production monitor suddenly flashed red. A delayed server had entered the suspended deployment path. Priya moved toward the console, but Raymond remained behind her and gave 3 quiet instructions. The alert stabilized at the edge of failure. Margaret looked at the auditors. "Can you determine whether Harbor caused the instability or prevented it?" The lead auditor opened 2 sealed simulation files. "Yes, one run with Harbor disabled, one with it restored." Every face turned toward the screen as the first test loaded, and George's version of the truth was placed 90 seconds away from either survival or collapse. The first simulation began with Harbor disabled. For 12 seconds, nothing happened. Then one payroll queue stalled. A second copied the error, and red warnings climbed across the wall display faster than Priya could read them. At 41 seconds, the authentication layer stopped separating valid records from corrupted ones. At 68, thousands of simulated paychecks froze in processing. At 94, the entire test environment failed. No one moved. The projector fan whispered above the conference table, and somewhere beyond the open glass door, a phone vibrated once against a desk and went unanswered. George stared at the red screen. A simulation cannot reproduce every production variable. That is why there is a second run, the lead auditor said. Priya reset the environment. Raymond remained behind her chair, his hands loose at his sides. Chloe stood near Margaret's assistant, holding the cream-colored envelope against her chest. The second test began with the same deployment order, the same corrupted queue, and the same load. This time, Harbor remained active. The first warning flashed at 12 seconds. At 18, the protective layer isolated the damaged process. At 26, valid payroll records were redirected into a clean queue. The red warning narrowed to amber, then stopped spreading. At 94 seconds, the system was still running. A green line moved steadily across the bottom of the display. The room went silent in a way that felt heavier than noise. Eric's pen slipped from his fingers and struck the table. Rebecca looked down at the termination file she had rewritten, but did not touch it. George's mouth opened, then closed as the auditors placed the evidence chain on the screen. Raymond's tickets are 4821 warning that Harbor must remain active. The executive login that downgraded it. The copied architecture with Raymond's name removed. The email demanding one clean accountability line. The recording ordering the warning kept from the board, the altered evaluation, and the server logs showing Raymond restored the protection after the failure had already begun. The rollback did not create the incident, the lead auditor said. It prevented a full payroll collapse. Margaret turned toward George. Did you receive Mr. Ellis's warning? His hand tightened around the leather folder. I received many technical concerns. Did you order Harbor disabled? The deployment required speed. Did you instruct human resources to make his record support a decision already made? George looked toward the recording cameras, then toward the employees standing outside the glass. The board is allowing emotion to distort a difficult leadership judgment. Margaret placed the signed audit summary in front of him. This report was completed before I reopened the child's letter. There was nowhere left for him to move the blame. Margaret suspended George effective immediately and ordered his system access revoked. She removed Rebecca from all participation in the investigation and referred the altered records for independent legal and ethics review. Eric's management authority was terminated pending dismissal proceedings, and the company-wide notice about Raymond was formally withdrawn. Then Margaret faced the open doorway, where the engineering staff could hear every word. Raymond Ellis designed the Harbor protection system, warned leadership of the risk, and restored the platform after that warning was suppressed. His employment record will be corrected. His authorship will be restored. The employees affected by this investigation will receive written protection against retaliation. Raymond did not smile. He looked at Priya. Are the live payroll queues safe? She checked the production monitor. Stable. All scheduled payments are processing. Only then did his shoulders lower. Margaret opened Chloe's letter again. The paper made a small dry sound beneath her fingers. There is one final sentence the board has not heard. Raymond looked toward his daughter, but Chloe only tightened her grip on the envelope's torn edge. Margaret read, "Please don't give my dad his job back if it means he has to keep eating alone at his desk." The green status line continued moving across the screen. Someone outside the room drew a shaky breath. Raymond closed his eyes for 1 second, as if that sentence had reached a place the evidence could not. George stared at the table. Rebecca's hands remained folded so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. Eric no longer looked toward the employees who had once applauded his leadership. Margaret stepped around the table and placed a written offer before Raymond. Reinstatement, restored seniority, and a higher position with authority over system reliability. What would make this right? She asked. Raymond looked through the glass at his empty desk, then at the rows of workstations that had belonged to people dismissed before him. He placed one hand over the offer but did not pick it up. You cannot make it right for me while leaving the same machine intact. Margaret waited. I do not walk back in alone, he said. Chloe reached for his hand, and Raymond held it as the room understood that proving the truth had given him power, but what he chose to do with that power would decide. Whether this was merely his victory or the beginning of justice. The room emptied without applause. George was escorted to a private office while security disabled his credentials. Rebecca surrendered her laptop to independent counsel, and Eric walked past the engineering staff without meeting the eyes of the people who had once congratulated him. Raymond remained beside Chloe until every employee had left the glass boardroom. He did not touch the offer Margaret had placed before him. 6 weeks later, the investigation ended with consequences written into records no executive could quietly revise. George Hamilton was terminated for cause, his performance bonus was frozen, and the evidence connected to the altered reports was sent for outside review. Rebecca Stone's contract was ended, and her handling of the evaluations was referred to an ethics process. Eric Dawson was dismissed for false attribution, misleading investigators, and allowing Raymond's work to be presented as his own. The company corrected the announcement that had branded Raymond unreliable. His personnel file now stated that the termination had resulted from manipulated records and suppressed technical evidence. His name was restored to the harbor architecture, but Raymond asked that the correction include Priya, David, and every engineer whose work had been hidden behind executive language. 4 former employees received letters reopening their cases. 2 were offered reinstatement with back pay. 1 accepted career placement support instead. The woman David remembered packing her desk after surgery received a corrected reference that no longer marked her ineligible for rehire. Rosa Martinez received written protection as a witness. David was given the choice to return without losing seniority. Priya was asked to lead the harbor reliability team, not because Raymond had rescued her, but because the audit proved she had the judgment to carry responsibility honestly. Margaret met Raymond in the same glass room where his cardboard box had once sat beneath the lights. This time, the doors remained open. "The board approved every condition," she said. "Independent review for technical terminations.
Permanent audit trail en évaluation.
No single executive can downgrade a critical warning. Engineers may report directly to the risk committee." Raymond read each page slowly. "And the former employees? Their files are being reviewed by outside counsel. Not human resources? Not the people who failed them." He nodded. Margaret slid a new employment agreement across the table. The title was Principal Reliability Engineer. It carried authority to stop unsafe deployments, but no private office and no ceremonial promotion. That was how Raymond wanted it. "We would like to name the reform program after you," Margaret said. "Don't." She looked up. "Why? The next person should not need my name to be believed." He suggested open record protocol instead, a name that belonged to no hero and left no room for hidden edits. Margaret signed the approval in front of him. Her apology came without excuses. She admitted the board had trusted clean charts, polished reports, and senior titles more than the people doing the work. Raymond accepted the apology, but he did not erase the boundary around it. "Respect is what happens after the apology," he said. "Not during it." That afternoon, Chloe received her letter back inside a new cream-colored envelope. Attached to it was the first page of the audit report, noting that the investigation had begun after the board's preservation order. Raymond placed the report in a drawer. He framed Chloe's letter instead and set it beside the chipped World's Best Dad mug on a shelf at home. The mug no longer looked like something rescued from a terminated employee's desk. It looked like proof that even while the company had stripped away his title, someone had still known exactly who he was. That evening, Raymond and Chloe sat in a small diner beneath warm yellow lights. The smell of grilled onions and coffee drifted between the booths. His phone vibrated once beside his plate. He turned it face down. Chloe watched him take a bite while the food was still hot. "You're not going to answer?" "Not tonight." She smiled, then became serious. "I didn't write the letter to get your job back. I know. I just wanted them to stop saying things that weren't true." Raymond reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "That was never supposed to be your responsibility. Were you mad?" "No," he looked at the steam rising from his plate. "I was scared you thought I failed." Chloe shook her head. "I thought you were tired." The words settled between them without shame. Raymond admitted that he had mistaken silence for protection, believing a good father should hide every fear and carry every burden alone. Chloe told him she did not need him to be impossible to hurt. She needed him to come home, eat dinner, and tell her when the day had been hard. For a while, neither of them spoke. Plates touched softly in the kitchen. Rain traced thin lines down the diner window, and Raymond's phone stayed dark beneath his hand. The silence no longer belonged to people who had been caught lying. It belonged to a father and daughter who finally felt safe enough to tell the truth. Outside, the city moved beneath wet streetlights, unaware that a small letter had changed a company. But dignity had never needed to announce itself loudly. It had only waited for honest hands to carry it far enough that kindness could become justice.